Good afternoon, how are you? Thank you for joining us for this equity. I am super excited to introduce Edith Bazile. She is a grandma. I always call her grandma. She's also a grandparent of the granddaughter who's on the autism spectrum. And she's a long time educational advocate. She sat on many seats at the table fighting for equity, and I love having conversations with Ms. Bazile. So influential, and she has been very instrumental in my fight for equity, especially here in the town of Randolph, Massachusetts, as a parent and a parent of a child who has autism. So I can't wait to introduce Miss Edith Bazile.
I am so happy to be here, and thank you so much for having me. Thanks for your kind words and your generous introduction. But I just want to say that it takes all of us. You are a vision and a beacon of hope, and I'm so glad that you have amplified your voice for so many parents. And I think together and collectively, it takes all of us to move the needle and to say enough is enough. It's time for us to have equity in a district that we pay for. We pay for them. They serve us. So that's the bottom line. And it's not happening yet. It has to happen.
So Edith, because you know me, I like to dive right in, right? Talk to me about how do you feel as a long-time activist, as a former teacher, a person who's also worked in a special education space. What are your thoughts? How are you feeling about this disaster that we are in education right now?
So I think one of the key things that this reveals in this moment where everyone has their eyes fixated on what's happening in society and they see the disparities staring them in the face, they can't ignore it. No one's traveling, no one's going to work. People are migrating outside, but for the most part, we have been in lockdown for months. So we've had an opportunity to see that there's a wealth gap, there's housing insecurity, there's food insecurity, and there is a huge educational equity gap. And so what we know is that when schools closed, that the lens that they used was a middle class lens. They closed the school in some suburbs, parents didn't have to go to work, but we know that only 20% of Black folks have the luxury of staying home because a lot of them are essential workers. They have to go to work. They have to get on those buses that are contaminated. They have to go to their jobs and, that have not been giving them the PPE. And yet the school district thinks that, well, these parents have time to educate their children. Some families are homeless. Some parents have overcrowded conditions. The internet service doesn't work well all the time. So there's a whole host of things. The inequity is just, tripled. It has just doubled down in this unfortunate COVID-19 pandemic that we're in. And so, yeah, I've seen a lot over my time. I grew up poor in Roxbury with 13 brothers and sisters. My teachers didn't believe in me. I didn't have Black or brown teachers. I had all white teachers. And so we are faced with the same kind of disparity in representation of Black teachers, Latinx teachers, Haitian teachers, teachers who represent the demographics of our students. We don't have the curriculum that we need that really amplifies and empowers our students where they see themselves represented in the curriculum. So there's still a lot of problems. The language has changed, Yahaira. We talk about equity. Everyone's using the word systemic racism. I hope it doesn't become a buzzword because there has to be funding, dollars, resources, supports, staffing behind that. And so, where is that for our children? If it's really truly going to be a system that's equitable, then we need to really start addressing the disparities that exist around who has stuff and who doesn't.
And it's true. And I think that for me as a parent, one of the biggest and most hurtful things to see is the lack of support and resources, especially for those children who are already learning differently, who are our unique learners. I get a lot of calls and emails and messages on social media from parents who have children who are nonverbal, who have no
Mhm.
clue what to do at this moment. They feel voiceless. They feel tired. They have nowhere to go. They have nothing to do. And I don't know if you can kind of touch upon the inequities
in special education that are
So,
also the same but a little bit different because special education is so political.
so I think on top of, the intersectionality of race, so we
Mm,
know that black and brown children get less. And
mhm,
then black and brown children who have disabilities, they are late to be identified, and then the
mhm,
services are less. So what the research tells us is, for example, when a black or brown child goes into special education, they get less resources, less technology, but they're also placed in more highly segregated, substantially separate, what I say substandard classrooms, where they're moved away from curriculum, and they're really where teachers focus a lot on containment and discipline. And so
mhm,
you say, where's the content? Well, the content, in order to be addressed effectively, has to be provided by teachers who are highly qualified and more than one teacher. So you
mm,
need more than one teacher. So we have overcrowded classrooms in special education. We have
mhm,
one teacher that's supposed to meet the needs of all students, and that's not happening. And then
mhm,
there's a lack of technology and support. But parents need to know their rights. Special education is an entitlement. So when a child is born, if they have an identifiable disability, say if they are hard of hearing or deaf, if they are visually impaired or blind, if they're born with cerebral palsy, if they are born with some sort of neural atypical disorder, these children are entitled to services from birth. So that's called early intervention. And then when children are 3 years old, public schools are supposed to take these children who have been getting these services as infants and as toddlers and start their educational process at 3. So at 2.9, districts are supposed to identify children in order to make sure that a program and services are in place by 3 years old. So I want to ask, how often does that happen for Black and Brown students? And how often does it happen accurately so that the diagnosis is clear, but the services are also in place? And so parents, parents, the law as it was intended, the regulations, the way they were designed, give parents the power to drive the process. And I always say that parents are the experts. Parents, you have your children from
mhm,
birth to 3 if they go into early childhood, which starts at 3 in public schools. But you also have your child, if they attend schools, schools have your child 6 hours a day, but you have your child 18 hours plus the weekend. And so what happens when parents go into schools with all of this knowledge, 18 hours plus the weekend, you're the expert. The schools are not necessarily the experts. You may not know the verbiage that is used, the educational jargon, the language, the terminology, how the laws are codified, and how the process evolves. But this is a time, especially as we talk about remote learning where parents are with their children all day long, for parents really to understand that your lens of who your child is and what your child can and cannot do, that's a
mhm,
level of expertise that you need to feel confident in sharing with the school district. And if they don't listen to you, then call myself, call Yahaira. We'll be there. We'll have your back because
mhm,
we as parents are not listened to. And what I want to say is that I had a child with a disability, and despite the fact that I was not only an administrator, but at the senior level, and I was in a doctoral program.
mhm,
They didn't listen to me, and
mhm,
so that's the problem. When you're black or brown, then you don't get the respect to which you're entitled. So I say that we cannot wait.
mhm,
If you feel that something is not right and that your child can do more, and the description that the school is giving you of your child doesn't feel right because you know that they can do things that the school is saying they can't do, or
mhm,
they cannot do the things that the school is saying they can do and is
mhm,
punishing them, then you need to feel confident in saying, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right to me. I need
mhm,
to call somebody because the system is not hardwired to listen to us. And I say for this special ed process, which happens to be a very complicated process, and there's an impenetrable wall in terms of having parents' voices heard, you need someone at the table who is going to advocate for you. So if I say, don't go by yourself. Take a friend, take a relative, take someone else so they can be the eyes and ears for you.
yeah, absolutely. And also kind of thinking about, during these times, right? And when we're thinking about equity, we're not just talking about equity in a sense of not just being education, but also how families get access to medical care, access to the resources of like the ABAs and speech pathologists and all those services that are typically not in urban communities, where families have to drive outside of their communities to go see a developmental specialist, where they have to drive outside of their community for an ABA center, right? So, can we talk about how those limited of resources also puts our children in a deficit, and and our children are always playing catch up
Yeah.
compared to their
So
peers.
so those are we call related services. So
Mhm,
related services are ABA services, occupational therapy, speech therapy, medical or health services. So if your child has asthma and uses a pump, then that they should have a plan so the nurse is overseeing your child to make sure that that device is used appropriately in
mhm,
all in school. And also, if your child takes medication, then that should be monitored by a nurse as well. Um, if you feel that your child is not physically able to move appropriately because has some mobility issues, that's physical therapy. In
mhm,
all of these services, they're called related services. So you have special ed, which is the instruction. That's the English, the math, the social studies, the science, history, all of those academics. So children get services, specialized services to remove the impact of their disability on their ability to progress in the content, which is English, math, social studies, science, and history. But then there's something called related services. So if your child does not have enough language and is not as verbal as he or she should be, then that's speech therapy. Occupational therapy has to do with writing, has to do with your body in space, organizing passages on the paper, being able to attend to a task without being distracted. A lot of students who have attention deficit disorder. So that's occupational therapy. And then ABA is really um, is is primarily thought of for children with autism, but it's not limited to children with autism. But what we know about ABA services is that ABA services is the only research-based, tried and true methodology to help students with autism. So when they're having meltdowns, you can replace their behavior by teaching them appropriate social skills, interaction skills, and to ask for what they want. So that's coupled with all those other services that I named as well. And then, of course, you have assisted technology for some students who are nonverbal. So if a student is learning language but doesn't have enough language to say if they get lost, how where they live, who their mother is, they don't know their demographic information, then what schools do when they're young is they augment services with what they call alternative or augmentative communication devices, and that's using technology. It could be using, there's a variety of low tech and high tech options, but what I'm saying is that if your child is not making progress along the developmental continuum, and you see other children, or maybe you have another child who is, speaking in sentences, is writing, but you notice that that child has an older sibling who is not up to par with the younger one. And that's a question. And that's a cause to say, well, does my child need extra support? Because the whole idea is that special education, the purpose of it is to close the gap in learning by providing specialized supports and services so children can catch up. It doesn't mean that they can't catch up. It doesn't mean that they'll always learn slowly. It doesn't mean that they'll always be in special education. What it means is that they need these extra supports in order to demonstrate what they know and can do. Because children have different gifts and talents. And so special education does not mean you have less ability. It means that you have different ability.
That's
So,
right.
for example, if you have dyslexia, you need to be taught differently. If a child has autism, that is a neurobiological disorder where the child has issues with social interaction, is sensitive to touch, has sensory issues, communication. may have some issues with speech, cannot tolerate noises, or doesn't feel right with certain clothing or
Mm-hmm.
textures or food. And so there are ways that we know we can address that. And so what I want to say to parents, regardless of what your child's challenge is, regardless of the nature or the severity of the disability, never allow anyone to say my child cannot be prepared for college and career or a vocational setting, because what we know for sure, if services start early and they are appropriate, and that's what the law says, and consistent with progress monitoring, because we want to monitor the progress, because you may be providing a service that's not working. And if it's not working, then you need to change it and do something different. And so that's why progress monitoring is important. So it's okay to say to a teacher, well, it's been 3 months, you've been doing this, I haven't seen a change.
Yeah.
And so the school needs to demonstrate, the effect or the impact of what they're doing. Otherwise, it's not specialized.
Yeah.
And so if that happens, then your child should be moving along the continuum, and you should see increasing progress. And it happens in the suburbs frequently with what we know in special education. Beth Harry wrote a book saying, why are so many minority students in special ed? Because it tends to be a dead end for them. They're not making progress because there's not attention being paid to literacy supports, ABA interventions, speech and language, OT, or whatever that child needs. So parents, don't wait. If they say, oh, well, wait 6 months, it's still early. No, you should see progress. You think of, if you go to the gym, which, none of us have gone to because they're all closed now.
All right.
But if you work out 1 day a week, that's not going to help you. 3 days a week, now you're making progress. But if you
Yeah.
don't see any progress, you need to look at your program.
That's
So
right.
it's the same thing with education. If your child is not getting interventions on a frequent enough basis, you're not going to see results. So
That's
it's frequency, it's also intensity, and it's also the length of the services. So
right.
you cannot get progress if your child gets, once a week for 30 minutes, versus 3 times a week for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is, service driven to make progress, and it should be an outcome. So if the outcome is not there, if you don't see, oh, my child moved from this number of words to this number of words, and I
Mm-hmm.
can see that, my child's initiating language, is talking about, what he or she did in school, is able to comment and participate in a social setting, and ask for things, or even negotiate for what he or she wants without behavior problems. Because behavior is something we see when children are not communicating effectively.
That's right.
And unless we see that, then you should be going back to that team and saying, well, I don't see a diminishing level of behavioral outbursts, and I don't see an increasing level of language output.
Mm.
So, parents, be confident in knowing your child, because the bottom line is you want your child to be an adult, and you want them to get out of your house
Yeah.
and live independently. And if the school districts don't provide the right type of education, that independence is not going to happen. I
Mm-hmm.
happen to be an empty nester, and that's a good feeling. But you don't want to, if your child is at the end stage of education, to not have them to live independently and to be able to have the job of their choice, be able to drive, get married, vote, all of those important things that make you a citizen. And that's what you want for your child. So when you think about your child when they're young, I say begin with the end in mind. And the end should be driven by what that child wants to do with his or her life. So building student agency and empowering them with, skills, and being able to navigate this academic space is critically important.
Here's a comment. Let's read this comment from Luz Maria Perez.
Hi, Luz.
My Lou says my son is going to be 4 years old and he is on an IEP for communication and only communication only. I think he needs more than that. My 5 year old is on the spectrum and takes all the services, but my younger one has some behavior issues and I think he needs ABA. He doesn't use utensils. I think he has a sensory issue. I'm waiting to be evaluated for more than a year. That's another issue that we should talk about too, Edith.
Yeah.
Having a real hard time with him. I don't know what else to do. I'm starting to get frustrated and I'm angry because he doesn't listen.
Okay, so here's what I want to tell you, and this is coming right from the research with autism. We know that there is a higher ratio, 4-to-1 males with autism when compared to females. We also know that the research informs us that if you have a child with autism, a male child with autism, the chances of having a subsequent male child with autism is 50-50. And you're already seeing some behavioral issues. So he's eating with his hands instead of using utensils. So that's a sensory thing. So you're seeing some sensory stuff already going on with your son that rings alarm bells because you have a younger child with autism. And so, some people might say, well, he's imitating his older brother. I think your instincts are right. And what I would say is don't wait. Have a conversation with your pediatrician first. And I would start thinking about things like for those early signs in a 4-year-old, because right now we can detect autism. I detected autism in my granddaughter before she was a year old.
Mm-hmm.
You can detect it very early. It's sort of like, is your child engaging in repetitive self-stimulating behavior like rocking? Or does your child enjoy things like slamming the door and listening to the door slam over and over? That was Lily. She just crawled up to the door, closed the door, and she would just laugh. I mean, that was so funny to her. She'd do it over and over again. Does your child gravitate for only certain types of food? In her case, she only ate foods that were tan, like bread or Cheerios, and she only ate with her hands because of that sensory input. So, we're learning a lot more about autism, but what we know for sure is early intervention is the most critical part. And a child's brain is what we call plastic, which means that we can change how that brain is wired from birth to about 5 years old, and then it's hard to change behaviors. So that's why early intervention is so important, and ABA is critical. So I would take what I would do with my 4-year-old is I would look at the behaviors. I would write down things that, does he scream when someone looks at him, or does he gravitate towards strangers that he doesn't know? Both of those behaviors are concerning. You know, is his behavior repetitive? Does he enjoy lining things up? Or will we play with toys that are non-toy objects, like a piece of string as opposed to a small truck? Is that more entertaining for him? Um, and does he have any unusual talents? Like Lily was able to read when she was 2 years old. She would say, "Oh, I want the Nutri-Grain cereal with raisins." She was able to read. So does he have any unusual talents or obsessions? Does he hear noises like a lot of children with autism will say, "Oh, there's a fire truck," and you don't hear anything, and then a few seconds later you hear the fire truck because they may be extra sensitive. So really thinking about your knowledge about your child. Parents, if something is not right or something is, of a concern, it is a concern. Don't second guess your expertise. And that is one thing that is in the law, but unfortunately, school personnel diminish the input of parents. Don't be intimidated by that.
That's right.
Stick to your guns, and if you have to, if you get nervous, take notes and just say, well, I've seen this, this, this. Here are 8 criteria that school districts use for autism. Children don't have to meet all of them. But if you know for sure that your child is exhibiting these signs, don't let anyone say that it's not happening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's you brought up a good point, right, Edith? Because I think
Mhm.
that for many of us, for parents, we get the pushback, right?
Yeah,
And it feels like, especially in communities that are doing more with a whole lot less, that parents like myself and Denise and Fabian who are here, who are demanding equity, who are demanding access, the level of pushback that we get back, the level of disrespect that we get is awful. And it kind of feels like you're being intimidated for
yeah,
access to
yeah.
equity. So, can you talk to us about your time in being an educator and the experiences that you dealt with as an educator, not just advocating for your role as a teacher, but also as a provider, as a second parent to our babies?
Yeah, so the district acts like it's poor, but they're not. They
Mm,
have the funding. If you come walking in with a high-powered attorney or an advocate, then you will get services for your child. And if
mm,
you are a black or brown parent and you don't have those extra funds for an advocate or a high-powered attorney, you're not going to get those services.
mm,
We just did, there was a study done in Boston, and we know, oh, see, there we go. Eats paper, rocks, Play-Doh, he climbs, has no fear of surroundings. Mm. When I go for walks, he tends to run. Yes. I say yes. Those are all the signs. Those are all. Well, I can't diagnose your child, but eating, you call it pica. So when a child eats non-edible foods, it's called pica. And the reason is that autism is a neurobiological disorder, disability. And so the way that children are wired, their sensory system, which includes the olfactory glands, the taste buds, all of that is different. And so when they eat these substances, it's because they're craving sensory input.
we did the
And
same
so that Play-Doh and the rocks, they're saying, well, why? It's
there.
because they're craving something. And so the thing is that I would not wait. I would call my pediatrician and I would say, I have thought that there's been something different about my child. My older child has autism, and I believe my younger child, because the presentation of autism is unique and different in every child. So
Mhm,
that's why they call autism a spectrum disorder. Well, when you see a child with autism, you see one child with autism, they all present differently. So
mhm,
your younger son is not going to have the same kind of symptomatology as your older child. It's going to be different, but it's going to raise those red flags that you so eloquently shared. And the pediatrician will listen to you and just say that no, autism is it can be diagnosed by school personnel, although they're very slow to do that because it means that they have to provide resources. And what I would say, he got tested for that. He did X-rays and he was fine. So the autism, a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, it's communication." Well, all children with autism have communication issues.
mhm,
Or they'll say, "Oh, it's ADHD." Well, guess what? Children with autism, they don't pay attention to stuff a lot unless they're interested. So it does look like ADHD. But see, these are faulty. I've been in special education as a teacher. I started as a speech pathologist. I was an administrator in Boston. I taught at the Graduate School of Education, UMass Boston, and I trained teachers in special education for 15 years. So what I've seen over and over and over again is these diagnoses that are misdiagnoses, and
yep.
sometimes children don't get a diagnosis as 12, and that is very sad for me because that's a loss of time, a loss of
Mhm,
interventions that could be provided for that child because the children do not have the capacity to express themselves. They are frustrated, which leads to meltdowns. And
mhm,
so they look for sensory input in other ways. And it's painful for the child and it's also very painful for the parent. So what I say is that your child um, is presenting with these issues that need to be looked at, and I would not let anyone say, "Oh, wait 6 months," because that's unconscionable. Write down your list of all those things: eat those, Play-Doh, climbs, has no sense of fear or safety will dash out into the street or jump off of a high place. That was Lily. Lily was doing stuff like that. And so those behaviors, if as long when a child exhibits behaviors become habits. And so
Mm,
changing a behavior that has been sort of calcified in that child's profile, like they always rush out in the street and you always rush after them.
yeah.
So believe it or not, when you rush after a child, that's reinforcing the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, what we say to children is we stand on the sidewalk and we say to them, okay, looking down towards them. Sometimes eye contact is not good, but looking towards them and making sure. I used to make Lily hold my face like this, and she'd be looking up and everything, but she was holding my face, which
Yeah.
meant that she was paying attention to me. And I would say, before we step off the sidewalk, we're going to hold Mommy's hand because she calls me Mama, and we're going to walk across the street. We're going to walk across the street. And
Yeah.
so, with a child with autism, the thing to avoid is saying things like, don't run, because that doesn't mean anything. Telling a child don't run doesn't tell them what you want them to do.
Yeah.
So you have to say, okay, so now repeat after me. What are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mama. I'm going to hold your hand and I'm going to walk across the street
Yeah.
slowly. And so that's a routine. And
Yeah.
so that's how you take one behavior that's dangerous and you replace it with more socially appropriate and safe behavior. Because what you're preparing your child for at 4 is to go on the playground and not be bullied, to be able to tell you what happened, to be able to interact safely with a child without having someone take things away from them and use, because children with autism, ultimately when they're in social settings like schools, they get bullied.
That's
And
right.
so there is a bullying, an anti-bullying law that comes with, so any parent who has a child with autism, you should have something in the IEP that talks about anti-bullying, because that is something that, because of, children like Lily may walk up and she might start scripting, and a child will say, "Oh, what's wrong with you? You're weird." And
Yeah.
then, she's coming home crying saying, "Oh, someone was mean to me, but can't tell anymore." So the bullying law says that teachers have to have eyes on these children to help them with the social interaction, because they need to be taught social skills so they're not teased or bullied by children.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of going back to what we were talking about, because you dropped a lot of gems, right? You talked about in your role in the school system, supporting, and advocating for our children that are unique learners. As an educator, did you ever get pushback, or what has been your experience in advocating to ensuring that our babies, especially our black and brown babies, gain access to more services, that
So,
parents
so
know that those specialists can actually diagnose our babies and actually be very instrumental in making sure that parents know that it's time for them to go seek, developmental specialists. Like, did you
so
feel you were able to advocate appropriately to making sure that our kids gained access and received services at a very
yeah.
younger age?
Well, I did because I'm me. you
Mhm,
know, I had two brothers with autism and they were older than me and they never got an education. So
mhm,
that's why I went into this field, because autism runs in my family.
mhm,
So I did, but
mhm,
I'm only one person.
mhm,
Okay. And so typically what happens is the first thing is you have to fight for diagnosis, and that's sad, but that's the first battle.
mhm,
Once you get the diagnosis and you go to the school, then you have to fight for services. And
mhm.
so you have to fight for the ABA services. ABA is so critical. If they
Yeah.
say, "Oh, we're going to give him 1 hour ABA a day," no, no, thank you. I'll take that, but he needs more. So you have options with the IEP. The IEP doesn't give enough services. This is the statement that you write. I accept the current IEP services, but I believe they are insufficient and request a meeting to discuss the same. That means I'll take what you're giving me, but it's not enough. So
Yep.
we need to talk about it.
Yep.
So in other words, like, I'll take your money, I'll take your services, but it's not enough. And then you fight for compensatory services.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and that's another piece that we should have a conversation about, because I do sit
Especially
with
now.
I
Especially now.
I sit on the DESE, the statewide panel for special education. So I sit on that panel, and I'm part of the executive team. So that's a statewide panel that's run by the state, DESE, and we talk about these services. But my issue has always been that, yes, the services are on the books, but you need to get it to parents in a way that is understandable, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the language that's used is for someone who is in the profession. There's a difference when you write something for someone who's in the profession versus a parent who has a child who's trying to get services. And then the other piece is, what about our parents who don't speak English? We need to make sure that our translation services are up to par, so that you're giving understandable information and in the parent's native language. Because the bottom line is, if you're talking about equity, every child that has a disability should get the services to which he or she is entitled. But that's not the case, right? We know that white parents get more services than Black and Latino parents. And that's true. Like, white parents get more technology. So does
Right.
your child have an iPad that's provided by the school that you can take home and use all the time? We know that when schools closed, they gave the laptops and the technology to our Black and Latino parents, but they didn't have them before. Why? Most white
That's right.
students had the technology, they were taking it home, and now we're behind because we have this new technology and we have to figure out how it works. And so the other thing is, the
Yeah.
services may be provided, but they may say, oh, we're going to give you speech once a week,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to provide it in the classroom in a group setting. No, that is not enough. And so, second opinion, you have a right, if you have an evaluation, to get a second opinion, just like when you go to the doctor, to get a second evaluation. So while you're getting that once a week, which you said is not enough, then you get your second opinion, or you give them evidence saying, this is why it's not enough, because my child had 50 vocabulary words last month and only has 51 vocabulary words this month.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not progress. And so
Mm-hmm.
you got to kind of think of, what does progress look to you? Is your child, you know, in the playground playing safely?
Mm-hmm.
Even though you're watching him or her, but before you turn them out, if they're leaping off the top of the sled, then that's a behavior that's tied to their disability. So someone, that would be an ABA, needs to take them to the playground to teach them, because playground skills are critically important, not now because we don't want to touch stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
before, are important so that children are safe.
That's
So
right.
anything that if your child is grabbing food, this is called daily living skills. Daily living skills have to do with eating, dressing, getting yourself ready, washing, knowing how to wash your hands, which is critically important when we talk about going back to in-person school, even now. So hand washing, those are services that ABAs can provide now,
Mm-hmm.
because that and wearing a mask. So Lily had a problem wearing a mask. So how can a child with sensory issues have a face covering on, which is really important to keep them safe? Well, that's something where you create what's called social stories,
Mm-hmm.
and the story about a little girl wearing a mask, or a video, because technology is good for children with autism. And so that child would look at that and say, okay, well, so and so, this is you. And so now every time we go outside, look, Lily, we
Mm-hmm.
wear a mask. Where's your mask? You have a mask? You have a mask just like her? Okay. And then you turn the page. Now Lily's putting on the mask. Well, let's try putting on our mask. And you practice it. But that's called a social story. So
Mm-hmm.
they provide these kinds of supports to diminish inappropriate behaviors and
Mm-hmm.
replace them with appropriate behaviors. Because a lot of times we'll say to our children, don't do that, stop that. But that's not helpful, because a child with autism needs explicit directions, and they also need visual directions, because children with autism are visual learners. And that's why social stories, having pictures, is really important.
Mm-hmm. And and I feel like you mentioned something, right? That
Mhm.
and I think that a lot of people are waiting to kind of also hear about the equity and these guidelines for our children to go back to school, right? Especially those children with autism or significant disabilities who are not are not going to be able to keep their mask or spend the last 3 months without preparing our students to go back into to the school in the fall, knowing that the mask requirement is kind of go longer than what we expected. And so, how do you feel about the guidelines and how that's going to affect special needs students, especially in communities who are already in a deficit, kind of like I'm from Randolph. We've lost so many staff because of the budget cuts. We've lost providers. We've lost our music, gym, art,
Mm-hmm.
some speech pathologists, and kind of talking about things like that because in school districts like Randolph, we're already in the deficit. We have, one ABA provider or two
Mm-hmm.
who are shared amongst an entire district. We have one or two speech pathologists that are shared among the district. We have limited resources, and then we're wondering why our students are unable to catch up. And this COVID has exposed what happens, as we said, that our white peers in different communities got access to technology fast.
I think budget is a big issue, and I know that Governor Baker added $200 million statewide to the education budget because of the COVID-19, and then there was a stipulation for extra dollars. I don't remember how much for masks,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
it's not based upon need. It's more based upon, I guess, it's equitably distributed. But if we're talking about equity, then these funds should go to the schools and the students who have had less. The schools and students who have less revenue, and those are our urban districts, our gateway communities, where there are not a lot of funding, which includes Randolph. And I know Randolph has furloughed some paraprofessionals, which
Yep.
is which is unfortunate because this is when we need the funding less. And I think the biggest concern is the health and wellness safety issue because right now the guidance is that the desks will be 6 feet apart, but no less than 3 feet. And then coming
Actually,
from coming from the state, they're saying, well, the parents will do the temperature checks and provide the mask. But what if parents have lost their jobs? What if
that's
they
right.
don't have the funds for the masks? And schools will have extra masks. But I think it's unclear, and that's where a lot of pushback, like how are students going to ride on the bus? How will you physically distance on a bus? I mean, some suburban schools are going to be doing things like renting trailers to have extra space.
Mhm.
So we'll have a classroom, and rent a trailer because they have these huge, areas and land where they can have extra facilities or tents. But in other school districts that are really budget crunch, and I think for Randolph, the issue is, why would they give $300,000 to the police department when that money could be used for schools?
That was like a big hot mess for us, and I have to say that I'm so happy that the community stood up and activated their voices, and that money didn't go through, which was awesome. But again, like thinking about the equity lens about that, right, Edith, is
Yeah.
that how in a community who's already in a deficit with a large amount of students of color in the
Hmm.
middle of a global pandemic, that we our town council or our elected officials put a motion on the floor to fund a police department, knowing that our black and brown students have absolutely nothing to do in our community over the summer, in the fall. But you were going to fund a department, one, that said that they didn't need the money, two, against our town charter that says that, and this is things that I want our viewers and parents to pay attention, because education is super political and the
Yeah.
wording is not people friendly, is not family friendly, but you have to watch how people vote and how they vote in the best interest of your family. So we put this motion as a community, as our elected officials, to fund the police department when we've lost music, gym, arts, furloughed our paras, as you said, who are typically in special needs classrooms, and played an instrumental role to our special needs students.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, half of, at least for me as a parent, when my children log into Zoom, I always question myself. How are my children in a classroom? Because my children are mainstream, right? In inclusion, in a classroom with almost 30 students, and there's only 10 or under students on the Zoom call. And I'm sitting here thinking, where's the rest of the 15, 16, 20 other
Yeah.
students?
Yeah, that's the failure of remote learning. And, as students get older, they know that they're going to get promoted anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
there's really no incentive to go on after the announcement that you're going to get promoted to the next grade. So
Mm-hmm.
that makes it more difficult for parents to get students on. But that's not the only issue. The other issue is, and I saw that 3 feet away comment. Yeah, so that's, that I just have to interject. So the comment was, I didn't see it, it just flashed up there for a minute, but it's confusing. We don't have enough rooms for kids to be 3 feet away. But the question is, why 3 feet? Where did that come from? Because the only thing that we heard is 6 feet. And so when I asked that question of the Commissioner of Education, he said, well, the CDC says 6 feet, but the World Health Organization says 3 feet. I haven't heard that. I have not heard that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where the 3 feet away comes from. The only thing that we've heard is that you have to stay 6 feet away. But the other thing is that they're not going to require children below second grade to wear masks. And so these are the kind of questions that parents have to raise questions about.
That's right.
Because the number one question about school reopening is, do I feel safe to return my child to school? And
Mm-hmm.
part of that safety has to do with the the building in the facilities. Are they appropriately, is the air quality appropriate? Is there enough
Ooh,
physical space? Who's going to clean down the classrooms on a regular basis? How are you going to maintain sanitation? Are there enough washing stations? How are you going to do physical distancing on the bus? I mean, all of that. These are the real logistical questions. And so this, if we're really talking about reimagining schools and addressing equity, we know that we've been left out. We know that our kids are left out. And the only way that it can happen is not by people saying, oh, we believe in racial equity and systemic racism is something we have to address. There used to be an old saying, I'm old enough to say that, where's the beef?
mm-hmm.
Like you're saying that you're talking about equity, but where's the beef? Where's the plan? And
Yeah.
so I think that parents are going to have to make this happen in
Mm-hmm.
their best interest, because I do not believe that schools left to their own devices are going to be able to reimagine and focus on equity, because our voices have not been heard and they will not be heard. I mean, I spent collectively 44 years in school, 12 years as a student and 32 as an educator. And so I see the same problem. We have a school system of haves and have-nots, and we're on the have side. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not okay anymore, because everyone is talking about equity, but we have to make them walk the talk.
We can.
Make
We
that
can.
walk, make that talk walk. The only way we're going to do it is we have to push a parent agenda. I've been on so many Zoom meetings with parent organizations, and now's the time for parents to really collectively, and it's happening, it is happening, to raise their voices and say, this is what I need to see in schools. These
Mm-hmm.
are the services I need for my child. Don't forget about social emotional needs. Don't forget about, parent education and consulting me as being my child's expert, my child's first teacher. So I think that parents are really going to have to, just push for this, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't want people to have a big rush of a talk and then all of a sudden things go back to normal, and then our kids get left out. So I say do it right. Don't learn from mistakes. You don't want to be a test case for disaster by, going to a school opening that is not fully thought out, that does not have, primary health concerns and safety concerns and social emotional wellness concerns. You don't want to be traumatized or have your child be traumatized. Push now and ask for what you want. Schools can refigure, they can build plexiglass walls so that when your child is getting a service, and they can't wear masks, they might have to do a one-to-one. Have a plexiglass window and have your child on one side and the other person on the other side with the microphone.
And another idea I was thinking was, if you're furloughing paras, right? What if we ever thought about, these are just ideas that we're talking about, is using paras to maybe do one-on-one where they're coming into the household of maybe those students who require a little bit more support, and also reimagining the roles of our paras. Do our paras now need to be certified to lead in teaching? And also kind of, thinking about what you're saying, that we want parents to activate and hold themselves accountable. But as
Mhm.
you know, this is systematic issues, right? Parents are home right now, overwhelmed with kids at home.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah.
said, we don't know if we're going to be able to pay our bills. We don't know, some of us have lost jobs. We don't know where that extra money is coming from unemployment. How long is it going to last? We don't know what the future is. And then in addition to that, we have to email our legislators. We have
Yeah.
to email our local elected officials. We have to stay in top of a school district. You know, this is designed for us not to amplify. It is purposely done where parents give up, because it's so much easier for us to say, you know what, I don't have time to keep getting all this pushback.
Yeah.
I ask a question, you're responding back to me with a question as if I don't know what I'm talking about. Or, you when you respond to me, you're responding to me as if I'm bothering you as a parent for asking questions. But then when you attend a lot of these school meetings and hear Zooms, parents are not involved, parents are not
Yeah.
engaged. But when we try to be involved and we try to hold ourselves accountable, the amount of pushback that we get is awful. And then we lose ourselves in saying, you know, what can we do around this time where parents need to force their hand, but at the same time, as a few people are saying in the commenting, we've already been excluded from the conversation.
So if you're not part of a parents group, become a member, whether it's, CPAC or,
Mhm.
any kind of parent group, because I think that's where you elevate your voice. I've been to a lot of parent meetings, Zoom meetings with superintendents, with the commissioner, and but it's going to take multiple conversations. I mean, we need to remember that we educators work for you.
Mhm.
Educators are public employees, just like police officers.
That's right.
They work to serve the community. And if they are not providing the service that you need, then we need to figure out, who are we voting in?
Mhm.
We need to vote because that's really important. You need to vote, and you need to go to a meeting not by yourself, but with another parent. Parents have power in numbers because the system, a lot of times you're meeting with 5 or 6 or 8 people and it's just you. And
Mhm.
they start gaslighting you, and you're thinking, well, maybe something's wrong with me. Oh, like, is it all my fault that I did this to my child? And so that is what happens. It doesn't matter because as much as when I went to the table, I was teaching in the graduate school of UMass. I was an adjunct faculty half time in the university teaching special ed courses, and they were telling me, well, we don't believe your son will ever learn to read. So what we need to do is just make sure that we give him books on tape. I'm like, no, that's not okay. That is
Mhm.
not okay. So I think that the things that come out of some officials' mouths are like just as you feel like how could they possibly say that we as educators who are in the field say the same thing? Because you do have some bad actors and people who don't understand the process and don't respect parents. But that's no reason for you to back down. And
That's right.
I'm sorry to have to say this, but you have to fight and advocate because the system is not designed to serve and was not designed to serve people who look like us. And
That's right.
I'm sorry to have to say that. And if your
That's right.
child has a disability, you have to fight. If I didn't fight for my son, he wouldn't be the successful, independent young man that he is. I
Right.
had to fight throughout the entire time. And then even when I wanted to bring him back, because he ended up going to a private special ed school, and then when I wanted to bring him back into the district, they didn't want to take him back. I had to fight to say, no, you're going to take him back. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you are a parent and you're saying, gee, what's wrong with me? Maybe I'm not getting my message across. Maybe there's something wrong with the way I'm saying. They're saying that I'm rude and I'm disrespectful. No, 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 no. Let
Yeah.
that go. You are in the same spot of all because that's what we experience. It doesn't matter how many letters you have behind your name, whether you are an educator yourself, you have to go back into the belly of the beast in the whale, and you have to fight. You have to fight to get services. And so, when you think of schools and how they were designed, just like the Constitution, when the Constitution was written, people who look like me were in chains. When schools were designed, it wasn't for us. And
That's
so
right.
you have to look at how, that middle class white model that was created called school. And,
That's
and, and that's why to this day, those who look white or white middle class, those are the ones who are successful. And the rest of us are considered others. And
yeah.
so what I say is that your pain is real, the frustration is real. You cannot make a change by yourself. The most valuable possession you have is your child who's
That's
going to carry on your legacy. And don't ever let anyone say, oh, well, she didn't show up, she's not interested. I hear those conversations all the time, and I have to shut them down. And I hear them at very high levels. Well, the parents are really not concerned. Well, you know what? You design a time that is going to honor the fact that not only am I a parent, but I have two jobs and I don't have a car. So
Mm-hmm.
what is the time that's good for me? Ask me. And so, when you talk about family
Mm-hmm.
and community engagement, it has to start at the level of putting parents in the driver's seat in terms of the time, the place, and the nature of that engagement that will work for the parent.
Right.
So it may not work meeting at a school. Maybe you want to meet in the community center.
That's right.
Maybe you want to meet at the parent's home.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you want to meet at, some other place. Maybe you meet on the weekend. So when I talk about reimagining schools for equity, it has to be not just trying to retrofit the current model to work because it's not going to work. Because what did I say? It wasn't designed for us. It has to be deconstructed and then reconstructed, not by them, because what they'll do is they'll reconstruct the same faulty system,
Mm-hmm.
but parents at the table saying, you know what, we need music, we need art, because music is the only thing that'll calm my child. When I play music, my child is calm. And so my child, is interested in piano, interested in the guitar, or, loves to dance.
Yeah.
So music, art, and all that is just as critical. So taking money away from that is defunding what is important for our children. When you say, why are people talking about defunding the police? Well, they've been defunding education for as long as it's existed.
Yep.
And when you talk about defunding the police, if I could talk about that for just 1 second
Of
quickly,
course. Of course.
what you're saying is that you want to right size the funds, that you want to make sure that you have funds for social workers and
That's
counselors
right.
and mentors and music and art and after school programs and
Mm-hmm.
recreational facilities and other sports, and you want to have summer jobs for youth. So defunding the police means instead of having a resource officer who is looking for trouble, because police are there for only one thing, to look for criminal behavior. And if you're in an educational institution, that's the the deficit model of thinking you have about students. then that's what you're going to get. If you look for that, you'll get that. But if you train teachers on restorative justice, so how do you create a culture where the student is the center of achievement, where you have a culture of achievement that recognizes the student's culture, their language, and students see themselves reflected in the classroom. So I see a teacher who looks like me. I see a para who looks like me. I see a principal and a headmaster who looks like me. But I'm also reading books that have images of people who look like me, who have done incredible things.
That's
And
right.
so that's an aspirational curriculum, but also restorative justice. So I always say to teachers, look, if you don't want students to eat in class, you shouldn't have your latte or your coffee or your water in class. So, you have to make sure that you create an environment of respect. So you can't say to students, you can't do this, but you as a teacher is doing that. And so our schools need to be centers of places that are celebration of learning. And the learning has to celebrate student strengths, because all students have strengths. I don't care I have never seen a student with a disability that doesn't have a strength. But it's up to us to find out what is that student's strength and how do we celebrate that, so we develop an environment of achievement for that student, where that student feels in verbal and nonverbal messages that we send that learning is for you. And I value you as a member of the classroom, and I'm learning from you, but I'm also here to make sure that you learn. And I respect you. I respect your culture, your language. So students get those messages, because one thing that if you watch babies before they even begin to talk, babies are homing devices for understanding who's a good and bad person. If you have a newborn baby, when they just beginning to squirm, and you try to pass them off to a relative, and you know how the baby goes, "Eh," that baby knows, like, there's some bad energy over there. I don't want to drive.
True. It's
So
true.
students are like that. Students know when a teacher does not like them. It's not what they say. It's what they don't say. It's when they don't call on them. It's when they ask a question, but they don't give them wait time.
And, and,
So students understand that.
and it's interesting you said that because my son, the teacher claimed or said that my son, who's on the spectrum, and he's, he does, although they keep saying we don't think he's on the spectrum, he likes to be alone. He doesn't like to be around a lot of people. They had his seat at the front of the class, kind of near the teacher, by himself, right? And her response to me was, well, that's where he wanted to sit. And I said, but that's not teaching him social skills. That's not teaching him how to be adaptive and how to learn to be social within his own setting. Kind of like, but you're willing to send him to the office when he gets in trouble or whatever the case may be, when you're telling me based on what you're saying that he wanted to sit at the front of the table. Not that I'm discounting that, but that's not what inclusion is, when you have your classroom and your way of putting control in a classroom is, one, having a resource officer in a building, two, having like a dean of discipline in your school, and then three, having specific students sitting away from each other because either they talk too much, their behavior problem. We can't address that with the funding of police when these kids require help to kind of address their behavior and how to express themselves or whatever the case may be.
So what I would say is that, that's a default system that a lot of teachers who don't have good classroom management use. So they'll, like, how do you build social skills if the student is always right next to you, but they're not amongst their peers? So in other words, what you're doing, that is another example of what I meant as containment and control. So you're controlling, we call it proximity seating. And so that might be a good thing. It might be good, for example, if there's being a test being given, because that way the student won't be distracted because the teacher is right there. And, so that, but if you're having a discussion, you don't want that student sitting right next to you. You want that student in a group discussing with other students while you're monitoring. But what I'm saying is that in order to build student independence and agency, and to empower students, to let them know you can do this on your own, you have to unleash them and let them practice those good social skills with models. They can
Mm,
say, I'm going to put your son in this group because these kids really know how to collaborate really well and they model good behavior. A teacher cannot model peer interaction. So,
mhm,
that is, if that is the purpose. So that is what I call when you have a good routine of discipline and engagement. As
mhm,
opposed to I'm going to sit you right next to me, and then when you get sick of seeing this adult, because adults, you're not interacting with an adult, and then
mhm,
that's going to lead to more behavior, and
mhm.
then you'll get sent to the office. Because
That's
why? He's isolated and segregated from his peers. And in the back of his mind, he's saying, I can't be trusted to be in a group with my peers because of my behavior. And I'm the only one that has to sit next to the teacher. So, what does that do to his self esteem? So, those
already
are the kinds
labeling
of
our
things that,
babies, already labeling our babies as trouble, and setting them up for school to prison pipeline. You know.
and that was exactly what I'm going to say, because and then you send them to the office and you're saying, okay, your behavior is so aberrant that you have to be kicked out of school. So kicked out of something, that is a behavior. And like when I talk about restorative justice, a lot of schools are using that because restorative means that we have damaged our kids and we need to restore the justice by saying
That's
that if you do something, maybe it was my fault.
mhm.
Maybe if I'm sitting there drinking my latte and you pulled out something out of your lunch bag and you're eating, I'm saying no eating in class. You know, but I'm not I'm sort of exemplifying that bad behavior. But I'm saying I can do it, but you can't do it.
Yeah.
That's that is not that is not honoring the student's humanity.
Mhm.
So restorative justice really means that we're gonna, interrogate, the kinds of interactions we have with students to make sure that they are just and that we are honoring the dignity of students and their humanity. Because
Mhm.
students are, like I said, homing devices for equity. Like your kids will say, "Mom, you gave him more. You like him better than me." Like you gave me, I only have 10 M&Ms, or you gave him more chips. Kids are like that. They
Yeah.
watch out for things like that. They know when they're treated better, or worse than someone else, and they call it out.
That's
And
right.
just like if we're at work, if we have a boss that doesn't like us, they don't have to say, I can't stand you. They don't have to say anything to us. What they do is they walk and they turn away. They don't look at us. They never call on us. But we know that they can't stand us. And so kids know the same thing about teachers.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, that piece is really teachers checking themselves.
That's
I
right.
want you to check yourself to make sure you're on the right side, and it could be you the problem. So when
Mhm.
you talk about restorative justice, it's not looking for bad behavior in students. Because when students come in, like all the teachers right? No, some of them are racist, some of them are mean spirited, some of them don't believe in kids. And what we're saying is that I cannot determine what your beliefs are, but what I can do is I can measure your behavior towards students. It's
Mhm.
okay for you to be like that, but it's not okay for you to engage in behavior that is going to give some students an opportunity and others are not provided that same opportunity. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about equity. It's really measuring the behaviors of adults and looking at outcomes. If we see that all Black and brown students are not getting the just and due services in special education, and Black and brown parents are the ones who are not getting the supports, Black boys are suspended at a higher rate, um, then we know that this is a behavior of practice.
Mhm.
These are the practices that we're saying, you could believe that, but you can't practice it because you're employed by us and you
Mhm.
have to treat everyone equally. It's just like when you go to a store. If you bought a bag of chips and there's only a half a bag of chips in there, you're gonna say, well, what's the other half of my chips?
Mhm.
And that storekeeper could be someone who doesn't like you, but they have to give you the same thing that they give everyone else.
That's
And
right.
that's what we're saying, that we want equity. If you're going to give it to them, you can't deny us.
That's right.
And that's what we have to call out as parents.
Hmm. So thank you for your time. You know, I appreciate you. You have so much knowledge, and I'm blessed to have Lily be part of the sprinter team. Your daughter's been very phenomenal in supporting the work. She's one of our ambassadors. And I appreciate this because I don't think that we ever talk about equity in a real way. I think that we're always tailoring our message not to make other people uncomfortable. But this COVID-19 has exposed the truth. And many of our children, especially students of color, especially those in the special education space, have been left behind. And many of our families feel helpless, hopeless, and they have lost their faith in the educational system. But we, like as you said, we must restore educational justice, and we must fight for equity. And so I appreciate you. Um, Hopefully, we'll see you back again. And if anybody's interested in communicating with Edith, please find her on social media. Definitely Google her because there's so many articles that she's put out there, a lot of wealth of knowledge. And again, thank you. You're beautiful. God bless.
Thank you. And I say to parents, don't suffer in silence. Reach out to Yahaira. She's there to support you, and I'm working with her. So, it takes a village. It's going to take all of us. Don't feel that it's you. There's a lot of people out there suffering, trying to make the system work. So thank you, Yahaira, for your work, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Love you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.